about the it should be about the office and not the person, right? At the end of the day, if your office and the system around that says that when you are implementing your foreign policy on various aspects, does it ensure that the last mile, as I said, that community or the country that you're working with, are they also getting the best out of your foreign policy, and are you
Hmm.
also getting the best out of your foreign policy? And you've created a system to ensure that that works. It doesn't matter if there is a man or a woman holding that position, right? Because that's going to continuously change. But the only way you can ensure that that system changes, if you've had already a diverse set of perspectives that have created or contributed to the creation of that system. So you have to start with a diversity of perspectives to ultimately reach a place where gender then doesn't matter.
Okay, then let me just shift the context to the Indian scenario, and just put in the last couple of questions. And I'm quoting these numbers from a recent article which was penned by the former Foreign Secretary Nirupama Rao Menon, of course, who has held a lot of important positions during her diplomatic career. And she actually wrote this article about CB Muthamma, who I mentioned in the introduction to my podcast. She cites the numbers that of the 1115 foreign officers in service in India, there are 253 women officers, including 10 women ambassadors and 4 women high commissioners. How do you find distressing the sort of gap in the heads of divisions, heads of missions, or the number of women diplomats in the Ministry of External Affairs in India?
I mean, if you look at it as of today, sure, it is distressing. But I think we have to also understand that the reason it is so low at that highest level is because 30 years ago the number of women entrants into the service was very low. Over the last 3 decades, those numbers have continuously improved and increased. Every year, we see more and more women are entering the foreign service. So, definitely in the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to see those numbers change. And I mean, as much as I'd like to be like, have 50% parity or more women in all your ambassadorial positions, it's not realistic. You have to go through the system. Sure, in the 80s, could we have had more women enter the system so that today we have more women ambassadors? Yes, but that's a ship that sailed. Can we ensure that that is not something that is perpetuated in the future? I think yes. And both the foreign minister has repeatedly said, and the Sushma Swaraj Institute have also repeatedly said that they are now trying to ensure that every single batch that is coming in, and as of August 1st, 2023, we have a new batch of officers under training, and there is again almost 40% of them are women. We haven't, I want to say with the caveat that list has not yet been released at the time of we are recording this podcast. So I'm
Hmm.
only going by the fact that I've seen photographs of the men and the women officers right now. So I'm basically counting these photographs. So it's around, looks at like it's around 40%, and it's been consistently that for the last several years, right? So we are seeing change. We so I think it's, yes, I agree that it's not ideal, but it will change. And I have no doubt about that, because there is no way now for India, the way it is around the world, the kind of power that it's becoming, the kind of country that people are looking India at, the way we are viewing India, the kind of questions India is getting, whether we want to answer them or not globally,
Hmm.
we are still internalizing them, right? And you cannot say women led development at the G20 level. You cannot go to the UN and argue for certain things without making some of these changes at home. And these are not difficult changes to make. And so I do think in the next 10 years, and we hope to be every 2 years, we want to update our report with updated numbers. And I think in the next decade, you will see that there is more, definitely a much better balance. The
Hmm.
other thing I do want to say is that yes, we have very few women ambassadors, but some of the posts and a lot of them have changed now again at the end of July, early August 2023. But as of last year, a lot of the very important posts to India were occupied by women. So I think that in itself is a message, right? If you have you can only have like 10 or 12 women ambassadors, because those are the women who've gone through the training. They have the capacity to be an ambassador. Where are you going to put them? And the decision to put them in countries that are really important partners for India, I think, is also a message. So I think we
Yeah.
should look at it from both sides.
So, Ambika, then, but it also brings me to my next question: that does larger representation effectively also mean meaningful participation? And we've seen this in the Indian newsrooms a lot. When in the initial years, and I've spent 20 years in the newsrooms, a lot of women would be, of course, recruited and hired, but they would be allocated what in those days used to be called the soft beats of not doing politics. Of course, the pandemic changed the perception that health, climate are actually not soft beats. They are the everyday beats that impact your daily lives the most, and they are such important beats. So today, of course, we are in a position where a lot of the Indian newsrooms have foreign policy editors who are women, and I must say that who are doing a spectacular and a fantastic job of asking the right questions. Uh, so when it comes to the Indian foreign policy making, because that one image that stays with me is post Uri strikes in the cabinet committee on security, when you saw the foreign minister, you know, Sushma Swaraj actually missing from the room. So, when it comes to decision making processes, do you think that you still have an approach in India where perhaps the women diplomats are being allocated what could be seen as, you go deal with diaspora, you go deal with maybe the softer issues, and not really come into the hard decision making?
Sure, I would agree a little bit that I think that that's still the case, and that's not just the case with foreign policy. It's the case with everything in India. I think it's the case with everything globally still, right? We are now seeing a world that is very visibly changing from a system that was fairly male entrenched and patriarchal for several decades, right? And there is a kind of pushback. And yeah, the kind of pushback you're seeing in India versus the kind of pushback you're seeing in Europe or in the US or in Australia, it's different, but there is pushback. uh, is it enough? I think that's debatable, but it's there. And so whatever the space is, I work a lot on water and climate. I have been working on water for almost 20 years now, right? From going in the field to doing field work, where I have been for years in the field, looking at how women are affected by water insecurity, by conflict, water related conflict in parts of the Middle East, in parts of Africa, parts of India. And I have been the only woman for in any setting, right? Now it's different. But to say that women, because there are more of them, they all have this agency and this ability, I don't think so. And I don't think that will change overnight either. You and I, Smita, are very different kinds of people. We're very like, I would say we're very different in terms of how we put ourselves out there also, right? Sure, we've gone through our own problems in life, but not all people are like that. So it's to say to that gender parity in the foreign service, 40% women, do they all have that agency? Perhaps not. Will they all learn to have that agency? Yes. And I think that's the case when it comes to the media also, or when it comes to the think tanking space in India. I mean, look at the think tank space in India, right? There are some amazing women intellectuals, women think tankers, but if you look at the number of think tanks in India, there are very few women headed organizations. The top leadership, the top level is still very male dominated. But if you look at the next rung and the middle rung, there's a lot more women now who are in this space. And so ultimately that will also change. But it doesn't always mean that they have agency, and I think that's not the case also only with women, right? A lot of young men who are coming and joining the foreign service, joining the think tank space, they're coming from all kinds of background in India. They also need a little bit of agency, and I think once that is easier to attain, then you will see more pushback, right? There is a very interesting story, and I shouldn't and I can't name the ambassador, but it's a very well-known Indian ambassador couple. Both retired now, but they're pretty prominent in the Indian government space. And the wife, she had training in a language and wanted to be posted to that country, but the service posted her husband instead, because man and all of that. Now she pushed back as much as she could, right? And this is the 70s, we're talking about the 70s and the 80s, and it took her years of pushback to be able to make change happen, and then make change happen for the next people that came after her. And she
Mm,
should have been posted to that country because she spoke that language fluently. Her husband didn't. Ultimately, then the husband also said, this is not the right thing to do. But you need both the women to be able to say, I this is not right, but
mm,
also ensure that that doesn't happen for the next generation. A lot of times, women and men, we get to a certain position and we perpetuate that cycle. We shouldn't be perpetuating that cycle. And then you need the men also to say, okay, this is not right. I'm not going to take this posting. This other person is better suited for the job. That's hard
mm.
to do, but it's necessary also.